All right, everybody, welcome back to the Glass Less Traveled livecast. My name is Mike Verivi. I'm a certified bourbon steward and founder of the Fox Valley Whiskey Society. We're going to explore and introduce you to America's craft distilleries, microbreweries, industry insiders, and professional imbibers to give you the inside scoop on the things you need to be drinking. If you guys like what you're watching, please feel free, and we encourage you to help us out on our Patreon page at patreon.com/theglasslesstraveled. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below to keep up with the latest videos. Tonight we're joined by a fellow Midwesterner, a Wisconsinite, and whiskey reviewer, writer, blogger, Jeff Schwartz, a.k.a. the WhiskeyFellow. Jeff, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing great. How are you?
So far, so good. You know, it's a pretty, what is today, Wednesday? I feel like all the days have just kind of been, they've just been like blending together. But yeah, no, it's, we're, you know, it's raining here. I don't know about up by you. I know we just had that nasty rainstorm and windstorm. What was it, last night? So we're, but you know, we're inside and it's you know, still a nice day out. We got the windows open, so we're gonna enjoy some fresh air and we're gonna drink some bourbon tonight.
Awesome. We've got the same weather here. We have our windows closed because it's still raining and the wind's up pretty high.
Yeah. I saw a picture that you posted. I think it was a picture you posted. I don't know if it was today or if it was yesterday, but you were out on like your front porch or something and you were like assessing the damage, and there was a picture of a stick that was on. And I thought, oh my God.
So
gale force winds.
You missed the fun yesterday when I was driving as this thing started. I just decided to Facebook Live it, my 22-minute drive home in the driving rain and making fun of weather people and, you know, just having a good time with that. And I had some people watch it and they seemed to enjoy it well enough.
I put on, so the thumbnail for this video is Whiskey Writer Reviewer, an all-around goofball. And that kind of seems to be the case. I think we've been friends on Facebook. We've been following each other for, not too long, but everything that I see is always like very wholehearted, but very, comical and kind of funny. And, like the picture of the stick on your deck after the gale force winds that we had to kind of, to mock the weathermen.
Yep. So learn, laugh, and enjoy great whiskey. That's my slogan.
I know. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Wilson, hello. Thanks for joining us again tonight. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Wilson. We are going to do a live sampling. And Jeff, this is the first time you've ever actually reviewed a whiskey live. Everybody, if you guys have a bottle of the Evan Williams Bottled in Bond, we decided that this would be a pretty affordable bottle. I think it runs anywhere between, $15 and maybe $20 at most places. Very readily available, but also a very, very good bourbon. So a little bit later on, we are going to, that's what we're actually drinking right now. Hi, Mary Tosh. Good to hear from you. So we're going to sample this one tonight. We're going to do kind of a live tasting, and kind of get into the head of a whiskey reviewer, and writer, to kind of go through the steps of what you go through when you look at it, when you nose it, when you describe it, to kind of figure out what it is that we're going through. But before we get to that, I love reading the reviews that you post each week, everything from large scale Scotch and bourbon distilleries, all the way down to much smaller craft distilleries like we were talking about earlier, the Luca Mariano Old Americana that you reviewed not too long ago. Good or bad, your honesty in reviewing is refreshing and helpful when looking into new whiskey on the shelf. Having sampled many, many craft distilleries, I'm curious as to what and who excites you in the craft distilling industry.
What excites me is something that's not a Me Too product. Anybody can do the same bourbon mash. Anybody can do, the same aging using the same, yellow dent corn. For a craft distillery, I want somebody who's going to take a chance, take a risk, do something different from what everybody else does.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I'm not willing to try, a standard bourbon from a craft distiller, or standard whiskey, whatever. But the ones that excite me are people who do something different. They've got their own niche way of doing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Maybe without, you know, I mean, if you want to throw a name in there, you know, obviously, you know, we try not to kind of like pinpoint, you know, who we really like and who we really don't like. Most of these, you know, I can't remember who said it, but there's a famous phrase: "There is no such thing as a bad whiskey, only whiskeys that are better than others."
That's not true.
You know, we're referring to the one that we mentioned just a few seconds ago.
I'm very familiar with the term or with the phrase, but that's not true. There are some whiskeys out there where you wonder what somebody was thinking. It's so bad. And, you know, part of it is, I wonder if somebody has distilled something and gone to all their friends and said, hey, try this, and to be nice because they're friends and family. Oh, this is wonderful. This is awesome. And it's hideous. So, you know, and others, it's like, well, you know, everybody has their own taste. Everybody has their own profile. Maybe this is what they're really going for, but
yeah,
not my cup of tea.
Yeah, it's you know, it's always fun, you know, doing this because you know, more recently, and I honestly didn't really ever expect this to happen. I just, you know, I do this live cast just because it's, you know, I started doing this during, you know, my own quarantine, and I had like nothing to do, and I really wanted to support those craft distilleries, and you know, getting people to reach out and say, hey, you know, we want to send you a sample. Do you want to do an interview? Alan Bishop over at Spirits of French Lick,
good guy.
Just sent me a sample, and I broke into it. So Alan, I'm so sorry, I broke into it. The Maddie Gladden, a little sample of it. This is a high rye bourbon, 4-year product, and I sampled it last night, just a little bit of it, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So it's, you know, I'm really, you know, like you, I'm really excited, you know, for what's going on in the craft industry, whether it's distilling or even in the craft.
Sure. Don't know
the other Monday.
Nope, here we go.
And you know, he's 24 years old, and he's kind of, you know, taken over this distillery, and he grew up in the business, and so we're really excited to kind of see what's going to happen here in the future. Dan Greisen, my good friend, he mentioned he's always got Evan Williams Bottled and Bond on the shelf, so I'm really excited. Dan's a good friend of mine. He helps me operate the Fox Valley Whiskey Society. I want to talk about, everybody can still hear me okay, I assume?
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to talk about how you got started as a whiskey writer and a whiskey reviewer. How you've been doing this for about 5 years now. How did this whole thing start?
This started off with me. I've done a lot of reviewing over the years. My undergraduate degree is in English, and for a while I was double majoring in journalism and English. And I've always had a desire to write. And I've been doing reviews of one form or another for, 20 years more. But what happened was about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I got bored one day, opened up an Instagram account, said, what can I do with it? Well, I can take pictures of whiskey bottles. Okay, what am I going to do with these whiskey bottles? Well, I should probably say something about them. And, then I started writing reviews. They started off pretty simplistic. And then, as I got things figured out and my palate grew, I started doing more. Then Bourbon and Banter, which is a website that I write for, they did a casting call, wanted to expand their stable of writers. And I entered the vetting process, I guess, the contest, had to write a review on something very unique that they had never written before. Chose a local distillery, J. Henry and Sons, here in Dane, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
did a review on them. It went over well. And then they came and said, well, we want you to do a second review on something else. And I wound up writing about an experiment that I've done for a long time, which I'm going to touch on a little bit tonight, which is why glassware matters. Mm-hmm. And after that, they said, welcome aboard, you're part of it. And it kind of took off from there. I write for them. I write for other publications every so often. I have my own blog where I try and house all of my reviews. But that's how it started.
So pretty, I mean, and for having been doing it, you started kind of, we had talked about this maybe like a week or two ago when I was just kind of asking you just for questions to kind of, do my own, research. You said you had been doing this kind of like professionally for about the past 5 years, but, really you've been doing this for quite a long time. So you've really had a chance to develop quite a palate and have sampled, I mean, at this point, I mean, God only knows how many different samples you've had and different whiskeys you've tried. One of the reasons why I wanted to do the Glass Less Traveled is because I love learning about people. Tell us about your first experience with whiskey. What was your first ever glass, and what was your thoughts on it?
Dewar's White Label, and it was. Strangely enough, I'm not a long-time drinker. I didn't, I'd have a cocktail every so often. But until, this is going to sound really bad, until I met my wife, I never started drinking.
She's not like in the next room or like.
She is in the next room. It's okay. But it's nothing to do with her personality or, me needing to drink to understand her. It was, she came from a background of, enjoying alcohol. And I said, okay, I want to drink something, and I want to drink something that's sophisticated. I don't want to drink beer. I don't like beer.
Sure.
I knew that much. And she said, well, you should drink whiskey. I said, well, okay, I don't know anything about whiskey. And so we bought a 375 of Dewar's White Label, and I tried it, and I said, this is pretty good. It wouldn't be my favorite Scotch now, but for a beginner, it was a good choice. And then I wanted to know everything about Scotch. Yeah. And then it had been a couple of years, and a friend of mine said, well, you should try bourbon. I don't need to try bourbon. I like Scotch. Scotch is great. Scotch is sophisticated. Was in that snob phase. And suddenly said, try this bourbon. Well, okay. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Then I went into bourbon, full blown forward, and ignored Scotch for a long time. Then somebody said, well, you should try rye. I don't want rye. Everything has been, I don't want, until I got to the point where it's like, every time you say you don't want, you love it. So just drink everything.
Right.
And one of the things I love about Bourbon and Banter is they coined the hashtag Drink Curious. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's been a lifestyle. And right now, you give me something, I'll drink it.
Sure.
As long as it's whiskey.
Right.
And, I don't care if it's top shelf, bottom shelf, $3 whiskey. I have had a hashtag for years, respect the bottom shelf. Mm-hmm. I love stuff on the bottom shelf. And one of the things we're drinking tonight comes off the bottom shelf.
It's a bottom shelf. Yeah.
And that Evan Williams White Label is my house whiskey. I always have it here.
Yeah.
If I just want to drink something and I don't even want to think about it, I grab that because I love it.
Right. Yeah, and we do that. We did that actually just this past weekend. I won't mention any names as to who was there because I don't want to cause a ruckus or cause a stir. But we had a little bit of a bourbon share this past weekend at a friend's house, and we tried some bottom shelf stuff, and somebody had mentioned, I just picked up this bottle of JTS Brown. I never had it before, and I said, let me tell you, JTS Brown is going to surprise you. I've done about a dozen bourbon brackets so far, ever really since this quarantine started. And JTS Brown makes it in every single one, and it makes the top 4 every single time. Things like
very like solid bourbon.
Yeah, things like Rittenhouse, Old Overholt, even. Old Overholt rye is one of my favorite ryes. So it's that bottom shelf that really loses out on some of the appreciation. But you had mentioned that you started off with Scotch and you went into bourbon. You recently became certified as a bourbon steward. So welcome to the club. It's definitely a cool thing to be a part of. Great learning process. Just a really neat thing. I have I wear my pin on my Fox Valley Whiskey Society jacket. Not now because I don't need a jacket, but. So tell us what your experience was going through. There you go. Going through that process, and what advice you might have for anybody wanting to go through it in their free time.
It's something that I've wanted to do for a number of years, and for one reason or another, I said I'll get to that later. I'll get to that later. I'll get to that later. Quarantine hits, and a friend of mine who I won't mention any names for the same reason I don't want to cause a ruckus, was going to put on a virtual class for it. And I said, well, we've been friends for 10, 12 years. Somebody's going to teach me. I know you know your stuff, so go for it. And I went ahead and I took his virtual class, and it was fantastic. What I would say to somebody who wants to do this is take it seriously. It's not an overly difficult course, but your heart needs to be in it. And this isn't just something to do. This is, again, it's part of the whiskey lifestyle. And this is something that, when you get yours, you should be very proud of it.
Yeah.
And, I was thrilled to hear you use that in your intro. To me, it's just a great thing to have.
Yeah.
Take your time, especially for the written portion of the exam.
Oh yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Don't just half-ass it.
Yeah, and you and I had read when you had got your certification, you and I actually did a very similar. So what they do, for those who don't know, they ask you to create a flight at the very end, and it's a written portion of it, and they ask you, create a flight of, I think it's like 3 or more bourbons, why you chose those, and then your profile of each one. So I think you chose Heaven Hill products. I went with 2 Elijah Craigs and 2 Evan Williams. And part of my thing with doing the Fox Valley Whiskey Society and now doing this is, when I do a flight for people, when I want people to experience bourbon or whiskey, I want to tell a story. I'm fascinated with the history of the whole thing. So, having the very erroneously named father of bourbon and the first distiller of Kentucky, kind of having that history there, whether or not it's true, it's still a great story, and something that people that are uninitiated might really find interesting. So I did 2 Elijah Craig, and then I did 2 Evan Williams, and did my little essay portion on those. But I think you're probably the same way, as with many people that put together flights, is it's not just about the sampling the actual product. It's really kind of telling a story with what you're going to be drinking, and if you know the history behind it, that's all the better. For those who might want to be who might want to go through it, the course to do online, I think it only costs like $60. The book comes in the mail. It's a great tool to use. It's a great thing to be a part of. One of the things that that really kind of struck me was in the bourbon community, Jeff, as it's very hospitable. Everybody, you want to have that hospitality portion of it, and you know, you and I are a part of a lot of these bourbon groups. And one of the things, as my friend Dan Greisen knows, is I hate the word tater. I hate the term. I hate when people get called a tater. I don't like when somebody calls somebody else a tater. A tater, for those who don't know, is somebody who just kind of will go to a liquor store and, you know, and buy the thing that they see on Facebook or on Instagram because they take a picture of it and say, oh, did I do good? You know, these are all people that want to experience the same thing that we're experiencing. They want to drink the same thing. They want to show off what they just bought. You know, if somebody's new to bourbon, ask me a question. You know, Jeff, you're the same way. You know, ask us a question. You know, we're more than happy to give you an honest review, but be nice about it. You know, don't be a dick. You know what I mean?
You know, I wrote a piece on this last year because I got sick of seeing the harshness in the community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you'd get a newbie who asks a question and people are just ripping into them.
Yeah.
You know, either do a search, you know, in the group to get your answer.
Yeah.
Or,
that's another one.
You know, what you bought sucks. And, you know, they weren't asking for your opinion.
Right.
They're like, look what I got. And
right.
They're proud of it.
Yeah.
And that's a completely different question from, hey, I'm curious about this. What do you think?
Right.
And, you know, don't crap on somebody's parade when they're happy about something.
Right.
There's no point in doing that. It does nothing. Give them a pat on the back, say awesome, or move on.
Right.
You know, there's no point in making somebody crazy because you know, you want to be the smartest man in the room.
Right. Or making them feel better, you know, making them feel like they're, you know, we were all new at one point, you know.
Exactly.
You know, a lot of people would be surprised to know that I've only been doing this for a little over a year now. You know, I got my certification as a bourbon steward. It's something I'm very proud of. I have about a dozen books next to me, all of which I've read multiple times. You know, I'm constantly reading articles and watching YouTube videos and learning from other people on, you know, on social media, you know, of things that I didn't know 2016, 15, 14, you know, what was coming out and labels and this and that and the other. So, you know, it's, you know, what's the phrase? The more you think you know, the more you realize you don't know. You know?
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning new stuff all the time.
Yeah. Oh, every day.
You know, it's I pick up something to review, and the first thing I'm doing is trying to learn about the distillery.
Yeah.
You know, what can I find out about it online? And you know, I learn stuff that way. And
right.
You know, you get into a new type of whiskey. What is that? And you know, you get in, you learn. There's always something to learn. There is nobody in the world, I don't care who you are, that knows everything about whiskey. It's not possible.
No. And you know, like you've been doing, I've been reading more on, like, you know, barrel science, and you just did a couple of reviews on light whiskey, which is like, who even thought that light whiskey would still be a thing or even make a comeback? So yeah.
It's coming back.
In some form or another, it's coming back. Being a whiskey writer and reviewer has to be a fun job. Between the samples, the invites to festivals, and all the swag, I'm sure you've had quite a blast over the past 5 or 20 years that you've been doing this. Tell us about some of the more interesting things you've experienced being the Whiskey Fellow.
It's sometimes very humbling. You know, when I started off, I did this for me. You know, this wasn't to get attention or anything of that nature. But suddenly people are coming up and they want your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they want you to help them pick a barrel. Sure. They want you to do all of these things, and it's exciting and it's humbling, and sometimes you wonder, what did I do right to do this? But that, to me, that's the most exciting part. I love educating people. I put on whiskey workshops, and when you see somebody get an aha moment, it's a blast. And whether it's somebody who comes up and they only drink single malt Scotch, and you put them in a blind tasting and you give them a blended Scotch, and they go, "This is fantastic. This is the best whiskey tonight." What is this? Well, it's a blend.
Yeah.
Well, now you've opened up their mind, and suddenly they're not just interested in single malt Scotch.
Sure.
It's things like that, or when you're trying to explain to somebody how to properly nose, a glass. You can see little aha moments, and for me, that's everything to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that single malt and blended and blended Scotch reference. We did McNally's Irish Pub, which is a little Irish restaurant down here in St. Charles. We did a lot of events with them, and one of the events that I love doing is the history of whiskey. It's a 2-hour long 2-hour long dinner where we'll do a sampling of Irish whiskeys, because that's historically that's where whiskey kind of all started was with the Irish.
Right.
So we'll go through thousands of years of history within, a matter of, about a half hour. And then we do the sampling of all the whiskeys. And it's funny when you throw in, a Redbreast 12 with a Bushmills white label, and you take away the label, and you take away the price tag, and you take away the moniker and this kind of idea that, well, Bushmills white label, that's like the bottom of the bottom shelf of Scotch, and you've got this award-winning best whiskey in the world. And when you see that Bushmills white label in a group of 40 people has almost unanimously won second place within a couple of points, it kind of opens you up, and you realize, like, oh man, I've been missing out on a whole world of things, kind of like when we talked about the bottom shelf stuff. I do the same thing. I love introducing people to things that they didn't think they would ever enjoy.
Exactly. And again, that's why I say try everything.
Yeah.
And if you don't like something, try it again a different night.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I have tasted something and went, "This," and then come back to it at a later date. And it's like, this is fantastic.
Yeah. Or vice versa.
So much of this has to do, what did you eat before you drank that? Or, are you feeling a little sick? There are so many factors involved in what makes the whiskey taste like it does that have nothing to do with the whiskey.
Right. So speaking of tasting whiskey, we're at about 30 minutes, and I think this would be a good time to learn a little bit about what goes into tasting and nosing. We both kind of know the science there, with the olfactory senses and why you want to nose a whiskey with your mouth open a little bit. But I'm going to let you run with this one. I want to, because like I said, the more you think the more you realize you don't know. So I'm looking forward to learning something from somebody who does this for a living. So everybody out there, if you have your bottle of Evan Williams Bottled and Bond, the white label, we are going to pour into we're going to use a Glencairn glass for this one. If you got them.
I'm going to start with glassware. And the reason I want to talk about this before anybody drinks this is let the whiskey breathe a little bit before you start nosing or before you start sipping. Otherwise, you're going to get a face and a mouth full of ethanol, which is not pleasant, at least not to me. So I have some glasses here. And the one thing I'm going to tell you about glassware is, here's 3 of them. Glassware makes a difference. And I don't make a habit of telling people that they're wrong when they say something about how they drink whiskey. But I will tell you that glassware makes a difference. I've done this experiment for years. And I've never had somebody who has proven me wrong yet. It's the shape of the glass. This is a shot glass. This is good for measuring. It's not good for drinking unless you're going to slam it. This is a rocks glass. Great for cocktails. This is a neat glass. Lot of tastings go with that. This is a Canadian whiskey glass. You can put rocks in that. It's same fluted top, so you'll get the benefit of it, but it will also take rocks. And there's lots and lots and lots of other glasses. My favorite is a Glencairn. I've been using it for years. It is the industry standard. They are very affordable. You can pick them up for about $7 or $8. You know, they're fantastic. The last thing I'm going to say about glassware, plastic, get rid of it. So your whiskey, that high alcohol content is going to bring the plastic right into the whiskey. And, you know, you'll have people that say, again, it doesn't matter what kind of glass you use. I guarantee you, all the glasses that I showed you, I pour the same Evan Williams white label in it. You will think there are 7 different whiskeys here. I
agree.
So, because each of these glasses does something different to the whiskey. So now that we've let this breathe, first thing I like to do is I like to observe the color of it. Color can tell you some stuff and not others. The nice thing about bourbon, unlike Scotch, is if you're going to have straight bourbon, it's not colored, or it's not artificially colored.
Yeah.
Scotch, you can use caramel coloring. You know, other whiskeys, you can do the same thing, but straight bourbon, straight rye, no deal on that. This has to be natural color. You will find that most of the color comes in the first few years. But, you know, a lot of it has to do with, you know, it hasn't been proofed down. Obviously, the more water you put in, the lighter the color is going to be. In this case, you know, it's just eyeballing it, looking at it. I call this a amber it's a pretty generic term. It's an orangish brownish color. It's a very typical color of a bourbon. But the other thing I want to point out is, I don't know if you can see the legs on this glass.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if the camera will pick it up. You know, a little bit there. Yeah,
but if you swirl it around, it will create a rim. And the rim leads to legs. And this is also something that is a little controversial, but it's still interesting. So, you know, this is going to generate fat, medium legs. It's going to do a medium ring. And what the ring and the legs tell you is the alcohol content in it. Will this be full-bodied? Will this be thin and oily? It's not an exact science. It's not really a science at all, but it's a neat observation. And it can tell you what to expect. So we're looking at this medium rim. It's got some fat, wavy legs, but they're dropping down fairly slowly. So, you know, I'm looking at that as this should be a full-bodied bourbon, and at 100 proof, because it's bottled in bond, it's always 100 proof. You know, you expect that. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to nose. And what a lot of people don't know is there's a big difference nosing here at your chin and jamming your nose in it. And I never recommend jamming your nose in it.
No, never.
But when I sniff, I start at my chin. I move to my lips. And then I move to just under my nostrils. And you will get different aromas in each one of those zones. So go ahead and try that. See what you're picking up.
So I get like a vanilla, like almost like a vanilla custard, like when I'm up here. But down here, it's a little bit more like a caramel, almost like a not a burnt caramel, but like a very light caramel.
Are you getting any fruit in this? Come just under your lower lip.
Maybe like a baked apple.
So I picked up plums and cherries, but the one thing I want to say about this is everybody's palate is different. Everybody's nose is different. And you know what I recommend to people who want to follow whiskey reviewers, again, nobody's is going to be exactly the same. Find somebody who matches you closely, who you tend to agree with. You're going to find that their reviews, whoever they are going to be the most important reviews and the most accurate reviews for you. But anyway, you can pick up plum and cherry and dark fruits in this. The other interesting thing about this is we all know that Jim Beam, for instance, has a peanutty quality to it.
Yes.
You'll find that in here if you sniff long enough. So particularly if you bring it directly under your nostrils.
Oh yeah. You know, it's funny when I tell people, like what I pick up, especially for people that may have never done this before, the power of suggestion, when you tell people like, oh, it smells like this, and that's immediately what you start thinking of. But peanuts, yeah, almost like it's not right up front, but kind of like when you open a bag of peanuts and you get that first waft of air, like right out of it, like when you're sitting at a ball game and you open that bag of peanuts and it's that first waft of like dusty peanutty air.
Exactly. And I mean, it's hidden in there, but I spend an inordinate amount of time just sniffing the glass because I'm trying to pick up as much as I can. And I'm not trying to suggest that this is, drinking whiskey should be work. It should be fun. But you're asking what's a reviewer doing? Right. And a reviewer is trying to pick up everything that they can. And sometimes you will sit there and go, okay, I think this is this. And you come back, no, that's not that at all. In fact, it's something else. And one of the tools that I recommend people use is a flavor wheel.
Ah, yeah.
So, I mean, even somebody who is experienced, I keep a flavor wheel around. There are things I sit there, it's like, what the heck is that? And, sniffing or tasting, you look at a flavor wheel, it's like, yeah, that's what it is. So, I mean, for me, that's helpful. It's not the power of suggestion, it's the power of figuring out what you got. So we've got that. The other thing that I do, a lot of people don't, is I take a whiff through my mouth before I taste it. So just suck in the air from that. You can get a lot of other different flavors that way. For instance, I get butterscotch when I just inhale, not through my nose, but through my mouth.
I get like almond.
Yeah, I could see that too. But I mean, you'll find different things that are different from what you nosed. And I still consider the inhaling through my mouth part of the nosing process.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's when I do a review, that's the last part of my nosing process is when I inhaled through my lip, I picked up XYZ. So the next thing we're going to do is taste. And what I always recommend people do is take the first taste, ignore whatever happens to that. This is a palate shock. And what this does is this gets your palate ready for everything else. So anything that's harsh there, don't worry about it on the first sip. If you get burn, if you get pepper, if you get jalapeno, whatever, just take it.
Did we lose? We lost Jeff there for a minute. We'll keep going, Jeff. I'm sure he'll pop back in. So I'm curious as to what everybody else is getting in this one. Jeff, if you can still see me, we lost you here for just a minute. We'll hopefully get you back here. Brandon Morris said, Mike, you're running on one nostril. So for those of you who might not know, and I'm sure you've probably all experienced this, one nostril, you actually have one dominant nostril. The other one is always slightly more clogged. And that's kind of an evolutionary trait that we have. So what I do is I go kind of back and forth, and my wife and everybody that I hang out with and do this with, they always laugh at me, because there he is. So I was continuing on. I was telling people, my buddy Brandon, who's watching from Notre Dame, Indiana, he goes, are you running on one nostril? But I always tell people, I say switch back and forth because you have, everybody has one dominant nostril.
Yes.
And then I always joke around with my wife because she's always, what are you going to listen to it too? So I'll always put it up to my ear to see what it sounds like. So now
we hear wind.
Yeah, what does it sound like? Is it telling you? It says drink me, right?
Yes, exactly.
So let's now we've smelled, we've inhaled through the mouth, which I've never actually done before. I've never even thought about doing that. So that's something that I learned, that breathe in.
No matter how much you learn something new all the time.
Exactly.
So the next part of this is we're going to taste it, and as I was trying to explain before, I was so rudely self-disconnected. Was never judge anything on the first sip. The first sip is the palate shock. Anything bad that's going to come out of it is going to come out on that first sip, and you will be amazed on the second sip that it's all gone, all the bad stuff, and you can get into the real flavor of what's going on. So when you take the second sip, you've got something that is called the Kentucky Chew, and the Kentucky Chew works for bourbon, it works for Scotch, it works for Indian whiskey. It doesn't matter. It's a process. You swoosh it around in your mouth, make sure you get everything all coated.
Now I've had this a whole bunch. This is one of my favorite bourbons, and I always come back to that same thing, and that's obviously the first thing that always hits me is the corn,
right? But
also, like I said earlier, almond. I get a little bit of almond in there, almost like a nougat. And this is going to sound crazy. I'm going to go back to I'm going to do a second sip here in a second. But one of the things that I always get is banana, and I don't know why. I don't know why. Maybe it's just one of those things that just kind of always came to me. What am I getting in here? And for some reason, it's just kind of like that banana-y kind of flavor to it.
And that's interesting because I never picked that up. I do pick up banana in whiskeys, but not in this one.
So now I'm curious because it was one of the first things that I noticed, and actually where I noticed banana a lot, and more specifically is banana bread, is Angel's Envy rye. That's where I pick it up most is just mom's homemade banana bread. So what everybody who's watching Silverlock Whiskey Club, thank you for joining. We are sampling. We're doing a live tasting of the Evan Williams White Label Bottled in Bond. I'm interested to hear what everybody out there who's watching us live comment. What you guys are experiencing. Tell us what you guys are tasting on this as we kind of walk through it with Jeff. Jeff, what are we like? What are we looking for? What's the trick here?
The trick is to understand you have a front palate, a mid palate, and a back palate. And it's basically just sections of your tongue and your hard palate. And there are ways to force the whiskey into one section or another, and it's by rolling it around in your tongue and keeping it in various areas. You can totally blow past a front by simply going past the front of your tongue. You can force something in the back just by holding it in the back of your mouth. Mid palate's a little trickier, but if you want to take the time to identify what's there, a lot of times you have to play those mouth tricks in order to find out what flavor is hitting you where. Don't try and come up with anything obtuse. There are whiskey reviewers out there who will tell you this tastes like lilacs from grandma's attic. Well, that's very nice, but nobody except you has any clue in the world what that means.
Right.
You know, come up with regular jargon: caramel, vanilla, corn, brown sugar, black pepper. Very common stuff. If you use common terms, then you're writing to an audience, or you're reviewing to an audience that's going to understand what you are saying. If you come up and try and get all crafty and, you know, kitschy, nobody's going to understand what you're saying. You're not going to your review's not going to resonate with anybody. So yeah, everybody's got their style. That's my style. That's my recommendation. I like to read things that I can understand.
Right.
And you know, what does this taste like? Well, this tastes like corn. Well, okay, everybody knows what corn tastes like.
Right.
Versus this tastes like, I'll pick on somebody, not mentioning any names, but every single person out there should know who I'm referring to. I pick up marzipan. Well, you know,
thank you for mentioning the marzipan. And I know, I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about, and I have several of his books.
Fred's a good guy. I've got his.
He's a great guy.
Fred's a good guy, but he even jokes around about the marzipan right now. But you know, that's his thing. He finds marzipan in everything. Yeah. And you know, yeah, it's almond paste. Most people don't know what marzipan is, though.
I had to Google it. I had to look it up, and I'm like, I still don't know what it tastes like.
Almond paste.
Just imagine eating an almond. I'm like, okay, almond, all right.
So, hey, we've got a question here from Silver Lock Whiskey Club, and I want to answer this one. So, do you usually write as a whiskey writer sober, or after having a couple of drams? What works better for me? I have a notebook by me at all times. Got one right here, and I write down all of my notes that I'm tasting. I write everything. I do all my research beforehand. I put all of my notes in there about the distillery, about the whiskey itself, you know, proof, price, blah, 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 what the mash bill is. And then as I'm drinking it, I'm taking notes. And I try not to review more than one whiskey a day. Because A, I want my palate to always be fresh, and B, I don't want to get schnockered, you know, when I'm doing it. But a lot of times I will write the review after I'm done with my notes, because everything is fresh in my mind. But, you know, you're asking me, am I sober? I don't get drunk off of an ounce of whiskey. Even barrel proof, it doesn't affect me like it used to when I was younger. And you know, it's just because you're building a tolerance to it. So yeah, I'm writing my reviews that night typically. I will then come back the next day and read it over, make sure that it makes sense, compare it to my notes, make sure I didn't leave anything out. But that was a great question. And somebody says they've never had marzipan.
Yeah, so
nor do you know how to spell it. You spelled it right.
But Brennan also actually meant, he said leather and oak, and leather is another one that you often find. Oak, obviously, being, you know, I hard pressed to, you know, to find a bourbon where the oak hasn't come through. Some of them a little bit fainter than others. You know, for me, I always tell people, you know, when they ask me, oh, have you had, you know, this 23 or this 18 year, and I can't remember who it was. I don't know if it was Woodford or whomever it was, came out with like a 32-year bourbon. And I thought to myself, God, how gross must that taste? You know, just sucking on oak. As a matter of the Speakeasy, Wisconsin. Here's your buddies right here.
Hey, Troy.
But yeah, leather is one that I pick up on a lot. I'm sure you pick up leather on a lot of them. one of the things that I like to tell people though, when they ask me, like when we, do our events with the Fox Valley Whiskey Society, is, how are you picking up these things? And I tell people, smell it first and then try to remember something, from when you were a kid. One of the things that sticks out in my mind most frequently is waking up on a Saturday morning and my mom would make cinnamon sugar bread. It was just toast with butter and then that cinnamon sugar blend that she would sprinkle on top, and it fumigated the entire house. And I remember it, and I still eat it to this day. And it's just one of those things that kind of brings me back. And it's always one, cinnamon is another one, that you should really kind of taste in almost all bourbons. So Mary and Wilson, if you guys are sipping along with us, Dan Greisen, everybody out there who's watching, please, I'd love to hear your thoughts, what you guys are smelling, what you're tasting. For me, it's corn, obviously. So, some baking spice I get in there. Baking spice is another real common one. But for me, one of the things that I really loved about this one was just that kind of corniness to it almost. I love that corn flavor. I love that sweet, like corn on the cob kind of, if you're trying to figure out what corn it is, just plain old, farm picked corn on the cob. That sweet corn on the cob that I love in a lot of bourbons. I often get that in a lot of Journeyman's products. So what are you guys? So Silverlock Whiskey Club, do you write anything other than whiskey reviews, like books or articles, perhaps some whiskey fiction or some mystery?
I write articles. I love how-to articles. I love experimental articles. For instance, one of the neat things I did last year, maybe it was 2 years ago now, is when we had the polar vortex hit. In Wisconsin, we were having 60 below temperatures. And when am I ever going to run into that again? I decided to do an experiment with 4 different proofed whiskeys to see what the extreme cold would do to it. And then I wrote about it. And it wasn't a review. It was a, hey, here's something interesting. I've written about my glass experiment, whiskey glass experiment, several times. Whenever I bring a new glass into the mix, I like to rewrite those and revisit it and compare it to how it was done before. I've talked about things like, what does ice do to your whiskey? I've done things on what's it like to be a whiskey reviewer. So, some of the crazy questions that you get, and the questions that you hate. For instance, one of the questions that I hate is, what do you think of this whiskey? Because you never know if that's somebody's favorite whiskey, or if they're curious. And if it's their favorite whiskey, the last thing in the world you want to do is insult them. Especially if it's something you don't like. So you've got to be considerate of that and be a little bit diplomatic. Hey, I've had that. It's not really something I go to a lot. It's not something that I keep at home. There's a lot of ways to say I don't really like that when you're concerned about hurting their feelings so much, without lying to them. So there's some questions about that. Where do I get the whiskeys that I review? I get them from all over. I get a lot of distilleries that send me samples. I get a lot of friends that send me samples. I go out and I buy whiskey. If I walk into a whiskey store, I try very hard not to leave without buying something. Even if it's a mini, just because, I've come into the store and, you don't just want to go in and look. So that's a great question. There's a lot of sources. Most of the whiskey I get, I'm not buying. It used to be that I had to, and now distilleries are approaching me, and, you know, hey, can you write about this? You've got stores who have picked a barrel. Hey, we want you to review this. And I always tell people, you know, as long as you are willing for this to not be a good review, you know, I'm happy to do it. If you're looking for a advertising piece, that's not what this is going to be. You can use it for that if it turns out to be great. I'm fine with that. But, you know, just because you give it to me does not mean that I'm going to like it.
Yeah. And we had mentioned that, you know, earlier with the, I mean, I don't know if I can I say the one that you were just, the one that we talked about earlier, the Americana?
Luca Americana?
Yeah, the Luca Mariano Americana, the one that you just really just, I mean, it was one that I read. I never heard of it before, so I told you, I just scrolled right to the bottom to see if it was what is your rating system? Because I want to talk about your rating system real briefly here. I love the rating system that you have. It's a 3-tier.
It is a 3-tier one that I did not invent. I took that was something else I took from Bourbon and Banter, which is bottle, bar, or bust. I'm not a big fan of numerical rating systems, you know, 100-point scales. To me, there's no difference between an 89 and a 91. It means nothing to me. You know, and I look at things of, am I going to like this and I want to buy it? Is this something I should try first because there's something a little controversial about it, or is this something that I shouldn't have put in my mouth in the first place? So bottle is buy, bar is try, bust is exactly what you think it is. It's a very simple system. Yep. Thankfully, I don't have a lot of busts, but you get a lot of bottles because they're good. You get a lot of bars because, you know, this may appeal to somebody because of this. It may not for that. Obviously, it's all subjective. It's all my palate. But thankfully, there's a lot of people who trust my reviews and must have similar palates to me.
Yeah. And Dan Greisen actually, you know, he asked the question as well. So we're getting some phenomenal interaction here, guys. We'll get to as many of the questions as we can. Silverlock Whiskey Club again asked, thank you for Silverlock Whiskey Club for your participation, watching, and joining us tonight. Have you ever discovered any difference between the sample sent by the distillery and the same whiskey you picked up from a shelf in a local store? That's a really good question. Have you found any difference between the sample and maybe the bottle that you would find on the shelf?
Yes and no. So I hate to say it depends, but it depends. If we're talking single barrels, the single barrel that somebody sends me and the single barrel that you find on the shelf may be two entirely different whiskeys. You know, so it's not fair. There are no two barrels that are exactly the same.
Sure.
You know, you can have two barrels come from the same cooperage, distilled on the same day with the same mash, put next to each other in the same rickhouse for the same exact amount of time, and I guarantee you those two whiskeys will not be the same whiskey.
Right.
So, so that's one. Another one is, you know, like Knob Creek. I'm not calling them out, but they're an example. And Elijah Craig would not be a good example, but Knob Creek. They send you things at barrel proof, but you're not buying that at barrel proof.
Right.
So, you know, I try and do my good diligence by proofing it down and guessing what it might be at 120 proof or 100 proof or whatever it's going to be. But, you know, it's not an exact science from where I'm at. I don't have the equipment to proof something down to exactly whatever the proof it needs to be.
Yeah.
I'm taking a guess. And yeah, I drink whether it's a barrel I've picked or something that I drink in the store later or at a bar, it's a little different, but you know, a point here, a point there on proof doesn't mean a whole lot.
Right.
7-8 points means a lot.
Yeah. So Jeff, we're coming up on the hour, but I got to be honest with you. If you don't mind hanging out for a little bit longer to chat with everybody, I'm totally fine with it. I got nothing going on, so if you want to chat, we're getting a lot of really great interaction. We still haven't even talked about the finish.
We haven't.
So I'm sorry, it comes up on my screen as Facebook user. I'm pretty sure it's Brandon Morris. Dina, is that correct?
For which one?
Best bourbon to offer someone who has never had bourbon before, Buffalo Trace. Kyle Gorman. What would you say? That's actually a really good question that I get a lot. You know, what's a great bourbon to offer somebody who has never had bourbon before? And Kyle, I gotta agree with you. I think Buffalo Trace is a really, really good option. I'd even say this is actually my go-to. This is what I tell people, you know, to kind of, you know, jump into it. It's readily available. It's not super expensive. It's, you know, $15 to $20, and it's a great sipping bourbon. Jeff, for you, I know this is your house bourbon. Evan Williams and Buffalo Trace aside, what would you say for somebody who wants to kind of get into bourbon, to really experience what it's like? What would you recommend to somebody?
Fantastic question, and I get this question all the time. What I recommend is not one bourbon. I recommend, here's what you want to try, and you don't have to try them all on the same day. Try Jim Beam White Label.
Mm-hmm.
Try Evan Williams. Try Wild Turkey. Try Buffalo Trace. Try the standard bearer of the major distilleries. They're all different enough. They're all affordable enough where you can come up and say, I like this, I don't like this. And from there, you can be guided into what you're going to love.
Sure.
You know, it's not one particular bourbon. There's just too much variety.
A really good recommendation. And, you know, you have to remember that, you know, when you tell people like, try this, 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 and this, and the Speakeasy Wisconsin, you know, how do you feel about Wild Turkey? But we will, so we'll get to that, because obviously I think there's probably something, you know, there's an insight there. When I tell people, I do something, you know, very similar. You know, obviously your Buffalo Trace, your Evan Williams, your Wild Turkey, but each one of these are vastly different. But equally as important as, you can go to your local liquor store and pick up 3, 4, maybe 5 of these different selections and spend less than $100. And then now you have a relatively well-stocked bar for not only yourself, but for people who might come over that have the same curiosities as you do. And now you can say, hey guys, or hey, you know, hey friends or neighbors, you know, come over. And, you know, obviously, you know, once this whole thing is over, don't go over anywhere just yet. Don't break the rules like Jeff and I have done already. So, you know, go experience these things, and you can get some really great stuff. You know, JTS Brown, you know, Benchmark 8, you know, is like $11 a bottle, and they're not terrible bourbons. They're not terrible whiskeys. And you don't have to spend an arm and a leg.
You sit there, you start off with Evan Williams. If you like that, okay, now let's talk about other Heaven Hill products.
Sure.
You know, or somebody like Luxco, who you know, sources from Heaven Hill. You can start to send people into this. Hey, I really like Beam. Well, okay, Beam has this whole wide world of stuff out there that is all based on the white label.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same mash through all of it. Buffalo Trace has, you know, their mash number 1 and number 2. But, you know, if somebody really likes Buffalo Trace, it's really easy to guide them through that. You know, so for me, I want people to find out. I don't want to send people to one whiskey. I want you to try the standard bearers and then come up and tell me which one of these you liked the best, because from there we can give a ton of recommendations.
Sure. So Silver Lock Whiskey Club again asks, and again, we still haven't got to the finish of this. We have to talk about the finish still. Jeff, do you only do bourbon whiskeys or other whiskeys as well? Any comment on the movement towards having an American single malt category? That's really interesting that you guys asked that, because the American single malt category has really kind of been growing, and you're starting to see a lot more distilleries kind of move that way. We had past tense, a distillery out near us, Fox River Distilling, some good friends of mine, Mike and Amy Orlando, that unfortunately, you know, due to some recent changes in laws, are no longer operating a distillery. They just before shuttering, they actually created a single malt, and that was really kind of my introduction into it. What are your comments on the movement towards an American single malt category?
I love it. I think that is the next big thing in American whiskey. It is something that not so long ago was a very rough category. And, there's not really much in terms of legal definitions to it yet. There should be, to give some guidance, but I have tasted some amazing American malts, whether they're single malts or not, American malt in general. There's a lot of exciting things in there. So much different from Scotch, so much different from Irish whiskey. It's just, it's a new frontier. And we started off this conversation, what do I like in craft distilleries? I like unique.
Sure.
I like different. And I think that's why I like this category, is because it's different. To answer the initial question that the Whiskey Club asked is, I'm not just limited to bourbon. I started in Scotch. I drink everything. I review everything. So everything that crosses my lips gets a review.
Regarding, so people don't have to jump onto Google real quick. What can you explain for those who might not know? What does it mean to be an American single malt?
There's no legal definition. That's the challenge. I mean, it's a broad, undefined category. But if you were to go to the Irish or to the Scotch definition of it, you're talking about malt from one distiller. So, let's do Stranahan's, for instance, out of Denver.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, very, very well known for their malt whiskey. If all the malt comes from Stranahan's and they're not mixing it with, say, and I'm just going to throw out another Denver distiller, Leopold Brothers. You're not mixing the malts from that. It's unique to them. It would be a single malt.
Sure. So Dan Greisen, he mentioned Westland, which is an amazing product. I'm not familiar with Westland. You'd obviously know who they are.
Yeah.
There's so many craft distilleries now. I don't know if you are or not, but or if you do or not, but I subscribe to the newsletter from the American Distilling Association. Oh my God, I can't remember. I'm in a brain fart now. But already too much of this.
ADI, yeah.
There's the American Distilling Association, or the AD, or whatever it is. And there's a map that you can actually view every registered distillery in the United States. And when I started doing this thing with the Glass Less Traveled, I kind of went on there and I said, okay, I want to pick out some really interesting places. And there's so many. There's so many. I was looking at these little tiny micro distilleries in Alaska, the northernmost distillery in the United States, the easternmost, the westernmost, some that don't even distill whiskey, some that might just do gin or vodka because that's what's popular in their area. And there's so many to choose from. I mean, there's something like, we interview brewers and microbreweries here as well. And there's something like 8,000 distinct microbreweries or craft breweries in the United States, and something like 3,000 plus craft distilleries that are distilling a product.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know, from different regions of the United States, you have, the different terroir and the different grain coming from very localized sources. What have you found in your experience, whether it be north, south, east, west, from a particular part of the country, really kind of stands out as saying like, oh, what's coming out of Colorado, or what's coming out of New York or Florida or Washington? What kind of what is there any region that stands out in your mind as to like, these guys are doing something right?
Well, I'm going to be a little selfish here and say that I really love what a lot of Wisconsin distilleries do.
Agree.
I love, and same climate. I like what a lot of Illinois distilleries are doing. I like what a lot of Indiana's Midwest to me, you know, and I'll even throw Kentucky in that.
Sure.
You know, this is the heartland. We get the hot summers, we get the cold winters. That does a lot of it. At the same time, you've got climate controlled rickhouses to where it doesn't even matter. So you can go down to Florida where it never really gets cold, and you know, you put in a refrigeration system and you can create winter in that rickhouse. Texas is going to be very, it's going to age faster because it's very, very hot all the time. You know, Washington State has some very interesting distilleries, wine country, you know, California, Oregon, Washington. You get some really interesting distilleries out of there because they're using similar methods. You know, even though there's a big difference between winemaking and distilling, it's still, you're handling barrels, you're handling product, you're aging it. You know, they've got an advantage. Each of these regions has their own thing, and because of artificial climate control, it doesn't even really matter. There's there's sometimes no rhyme or reason to it. And even Kentucky distilleries, some of them do, you know, artificial winters, artificial summers. Woodford is big on that.
Yeah. Well, even, you know, you look at Buffalo Trace with Warehouse X, or Four Roses, you know, who does the single story rickhouse to, you know, to kind of minimize any kind of variation. So we're good, guys. I love it. I love all the interaction. Speakeasy, Wisconsin, you know, they mentioned J. Henry, Driftless Glen, Washington Street, or Woodinville, which is Seattle. You know, J. Henry, our number one episode, our very first episode that we ever did at the Glassless Traveled was with Joe Henry. Liz Henry is just, I mean, she's a sweetheart. She's like everybody's mom. I love her to death, and I've never actually met her in real life. She's always very interactive.
You need to change that.
I know. So actually, we're going to be going up to, you're from Wisconsin, and this is kind of more on a personal note. So everybody, you know, we'll kind of pause for a minute. We're actually going, my wife and I are going up to Pardeeville, Wisconsin. Pardee, you know Pardeeville. We're going to go up there this weekend. I have a buddy who has a lake house, and we actually passed a ton of billboards for J. Henry. I should maybe give Joe a call and tell him we're gonna come up there. Dan Greisen, my glass is empty, need a refill so we can discuss the finish. Mary Tosh, a good friend of mine, she's been with us since the very beginning of the Fox Valley Whiskey Society. Mary, love her to death. So let's talk about the finish. I poured a little bit more in my glass. I know I saw you did as well. Yep. When we talk about the finish, we talked about the nose, we talked about kind of how to describe it. I like to tell people, like, try not to go too deep into, like, you know, the marzipan or anything like that. Just, you know, on the fly, what does it remind you of? One thing that I got while we were talking and I was sipping was, you know, I used to work at a movie theater. I managed a couple movie theaters throughout my career, and buttered popcorn is one thing that really sticks out in my mind, is very prevalent. I could taste it in my sleep. There's still dreams that I have where I'm threading the projector with the film, and it's just a part of my life that I've lived over and over and over again. And it's, you know, I parts of me wish I could go back to it. My waistline and my cholesterol appreciates that I don't. Buttered popcorn is something that I get actually out of this one, and I wanted to mention it. So if anybody else, maybe, I don't know if anybody else gets buttered popcorn, please comment on that one. Say, please, me too.
I get a lot of buttered popcorn out of unaged whiskeys. You know, especially if you take new make off the still, it's almost always buttered popcorn.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a very, very common, profile that can come out.
Yeah. So what's when we talk about the finish?
Sure.
What are, and Dan Greisen, there he is, was just thinking buttered popcorn. What are we talking about when we see the word finish in a review? What is that finish describing?
Finish is what happens after you swallow. So some of it will happen in your mouth, some of it will happen in your throat. And it can happen in both. And the first thing about finish is it long? Is it medium? Is it short? Or is it somewhere in between those three? I often run into a medium long or a medium short finish. So does something go on for several minutes? That's a very long finish. Is something through almost as soon as you swallow it? That's a very short finish. And then there's anything in between. But if you wait in between sips, and sometimes you have to wait 3, 4, 5 minutes, there's a lot that's still going on. And those are that is the description of the finish. What's happened after you've swallowed?
All right. So again,
and
everybody,
to me, this has a very medium finish.
I agree. Yeah, I was going to say I would almost say medium long though. I would go towards the medium long, but it doesn't fade out real quick. It doesn't burn real long. It just lets you know that it's there long enough so that you can kind of, still give it a little bit of chew. What are you guys, everybody out there that's still watching, what are you guys getting on the finish? I got corn, obviously, buttered popcorn. It was on the finish was where I got it. Also, like white pepper. White pepper is a little bit milder, a little bit softer than like a cracked black pepper. I'd say maybe almost like a dark caramel, almost like if you left the caramel on the stove too long. Maybe a little bit of sweetness, but really a lot more of that kind of like pepper that I get on the back, and I mostly get it like right back here. I get it right back here on the tongue. So I'm curious as to what you guys are getting on the finish. I know several of you went and got refills. We have really, really great viewer retention here. Dan Greisen, medium finish, you get cinnamon. Silverlock Whiskey Club, Jeff, when you rate a whiskey, what weightages do you give the nose, palate, finish, price, and availability? That's another good one, actually. I see Breaking Bourbon is a review site that I go to pretty frequently. I think they're probably, I would say arguably probably one of the most popular review sites. When it comes to finish, price, and availability, does that have any effect at all on the rating system, or is it purely, do I want to drink this again?
Yes. The availability, the only time that availability comes into my rating system is my year-end reviews for the best whiskeys of the year. And for that, it's got to be something that's readily available, or at least reasonably available. But aside from that, no. Availability, price comes into effect. Availability does not. I get a lot of samples where it's only in one market. They're brand new. They're a micro distillery, but they wanted a review done. They send me a sample. I think it's fantastic. They're not going to get a lower rating because they're only in one market. That doesn't make any sense to me. Is it a decent whiskey that costs $100? That's not going to get a good rating out of me because there's no return on investment, and you get a lot of that comes into play. Is this a $50 whiskey? Yes, that's part of the bar bottle part of the rating system. This is a good whiskey. In my opinion, it's not a $60 whiskey.
Sure.
That's going to wind up getting a bar rating. You should try this first before you commit to a bottle. At the same time, is something good and it's a $15 whiskey, yeah, that's going to be an easy bottle because you're getting so much for that $15. So that's a rating. And again, this is why I have the 3 rating system, versus numbers. Because all of these other questions that you've asked that's all part of it. Nose is part of it. Taste is part of it. Finish is part of it. The most important quality of all of it, though, is the taste. I've had stuff that has a beautiful nose and a very mediocre palate. And that's not going to get a good rating out of me, because in the end, I'm drinking this.
Sure.
And I'm tasting it. And to me, that's the most, of all the qualities, what's this taste like?
Sure.
Is the most important.
So Mary asked, is WhiskeyFellow, is it a hobby or is this your day job? And I don't know if maybe that's too personal, but is this it's, we've been friends on Facebook, and I love every time you post, because it's always something hilarious or something very meaningful. But I also love that you almost every other day, you're posting a review to the Fox Valley Whiskey Society group page, which I don't know if anybody else, I read them because I'm, obviously for this, I want to know, I want to know, who I need to call and who I need to contact. Is this a hobby, or is this kind of like, is this your day job?
It's not my day job, but it is a job.
Sure.
I do not get paid for reviews. I refuse to be paid for reviews. I will write ads for people, a paid review. And if I do that, it is absolutely no question on the planet that it's a paid review.
Sure.
But that happens once or twice a year. There are aspects to WhiskeyFellow that are paid, but the review process is 100% free. I make no money from it. My blog website, reviews.whiskeyfellow.net, takes no advertising. I have no sponsors. There's no Patreon. It's completely free, because that's writing whiskey reviews for me as a hobby.
Sure.
I do have a day job, which I'm not going to get into. It's nothing illegal. It's just personal.
Sure.
But this is my side gig, and there's real income involved with it.
And I think that's, somebody like you who doesn't take any kind of income from this is really the best kind of person to rely on for, when I go to a Binny's or a liquor store or wherever, and I say, oh, I saw this on a review and Jeff didn't really like it, knowing that you didn't take anything from it, or that you really liked it, knowing that you didn't take anything from it. You go to some of these bigger websites, and we mentioned Breaking Bourbon, not to discredit them at all. Those, the guys at Breaking Bourbon are great guys. They do phenomenal work. But there are advertisements on that page. Bourbon enthusiasts and a lot of these podcasts that advertise for this, and this bourbon and this whiskey and all this. You have to kind of wonder, is there any kind of, are they taking anything from it to the point where, oh, I'm gonna talk it up because they pay me X amount of dollars to advertise it. So it's nice that your reviews are very honest, because there's, if somebody gets hurt because of it, they get hurt because of it, but you don't get anything out of it.
I get nothing out of it. B, my integrity at the end of the day, even in my day job, I tell people this all the time. At the end of the day, my integrity is all I have.
Right.
And if I do something to screw it up, it is so hard to get that back. So for me, it was a very conscious decision to set up a website without any advertisements, without any pay-to-click or anything like that. At the other end of the spectrum, from the reviewing standpoint, I'm going to be honest, I get more whiskey in than I can drink. And if I give and it's a wonderful thing, but if I give a bad review on something, it's because it deserved it. And I don't like to be mean, but I'm not really worried if a lot of reviewers, if I give a bad review to this, they're not going to send me any more whiskey.
Right.
Well, if it's bad whiskey, why do I want more of it?
Right.
That's my philosophy, and some of it is, I would think as a distiller, you want people to tell you what's wrong with your whiskey. You don't need a yes man. So yeah, if I tell you what's wrong with it, it's constructive criticism. Hey, this is proof down too low. Or, hey, this needs to have another year or two in the barrel. And I get the whole, you're not making money as long as it's sitting in the rick, but you can't release it too early either. This is a long-term commitment, like a marriage. Yeah. And, if you're coming in for the short run, make vodka and gin. So I am always hopeful that if I write a bad review, unless it's something clearly hideous, I'm hoping that they're taking it as constructive criticism. And look, here's how you can improve your product. And if you do that, I want to try it again.
Yeah.
I'll review it again. There's no, this is never going into my mouth again. I do not have a philosophy. Part of the Drink Curious philosophy that we started this off with is I drink this once, I don't like it, I'm never coming back to it.
Sure.
I can't tell you the number of whiskeys that I have done that to, where I've come back years later and gone, my gosh, I was an idiot. And the best story that I have on that is Weller Antique.
Yeah.
I had a bottle of that very fresh into my bourbon life, and I thought it was too hot. I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. And then 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to try it again. It's like, wow, I have passed up buying this bottle so many times because I didn't like it way back then.
Sure.
And now it's fantastic. And that's another one that I've always had bottles in for.
Yeah. And that's something that we find pretty often, as far as, I love diving into the science of this whole thing. And again, everybody, I love the interaction. Jeff, this is probably one of the best conversations that we've had on the show. So if you don't mind, I'm just
glad to hear that.
We'll just keep rambling on. Silver Rock.
I'm probably going to pass out at about 11 o'clock, which is
I probably will too. Yeah, so we've got some time, and my wife is back here and she's doing this. I know we've gone past the hour. When you talk about the science of things, when people say like, oh, my palate has changed. Typically, your taste buds change every 7 years or so. So, not that long ago, I didn't really like whiskey at all. I couldn't drink rum, tequila, vodka, whiskey. I couldn't drink any of it because all I tasted was that ethyl alcohol taste to it. And then it was like one day it was a switch just flipped. And I could finally pick up on those subtle nuances. And I've even had some rums and some vodkas. To give a shout out to the guys at Wilderness Trail, they sent me a bottle of their Blue Heron vodka, and I'm not a vodka drinker, but their vodka is probably one of the best I've ever had, along with Whiskey Acres. Their rum is fantastic. So you pick up on these things. I always encourage people like, yeah, you may have had it a long time ago, try it again. Because you never know, what you might experience. Silverlock Whiskey Club, thank you for watching again. Thank you for being so interactive. We have really, really great viewer retention right now. If nobody can see the analytics of this, but really, really great viewer retention. Silverlock Whiskey Club asks, what's your take on flavored whiskeys like Screwball? Oh, he froze. So I will give you, Jeff he'll be back in a second. So Silverlock Whiskey Club, when it comes to, for me personally, for things like flavored whiskeys like Screwball or Fireball, Fireball is actually one of the best selling whiskeys in the United States, and it can really barely be called a whiskey at that. Jeff will be back here in just a minute. He's, he probably, we're having some storms and some rain in the area. So he'll be back in a second. So I'll answer that question. And actually here he comes right here. So when it comes to flavored whiskeys, for me personally, and Jeff, I think you probably share the same idea. I don't crap on flavored whiskeys. If that's your thing, if that's what you like, then that's what you like. I have Jack Honey behind me. I like Fireball. When I'm at a bar and it's the right mood and it's the right moment, you bet your butt I'm going to take a shot of Fireball, because why not? I love that spicy cinnamon. Things like Screwball, the peanut butter flavored, where it's really sugary, great in a cocktail. Absolutely phenomenal in a cocktail. Am I going to drink it over ice? Probably not. But in a cocktail, flavored whiskeys, for some people, if that's what's going to get you into it, flavored whiskeys, are a great kind of segue into, what we've been sampling here, which is just bourbon. So while maybe not everybody is, into the flavored whiskey, I think maybe the question should be like, when it comes to flavored whiskeys, is it a good segue? And I think it really is. I think flavored whiskeys definitely have their place. They have their moment. They have their time. Jeff, I'm curious as to your thoughts on flavored as a Silverlock Whiskey Club when it comes to things like Fireball or Screwball.
I enjoy the hell out of it. And before I get to that, I want to address Speakeasy's question next after this. But I enjoy the hell out of not Fireball. It's not my favorite, but flavored whiskeys. I love Screwball. And, you say, yeah, in a cocktail, I drink it neat, but I'm a peanut butter freak.
So is my wife.
If you gave me a spoon and a jar of peanut butter, I'm happy.
Oh, you spoke to my, you spoke to my heart, Jeff. You spoke to my soul.
I'm not a coffee drinker, but I love coffee flavored whiskeys. I like coffee flavor. I don't like coffee. So, the pecan whiskeys are fantastic. I don't like the candy sweet Jolly Rancher type stuff.
Sure.
But a good flavor whiskey that tastes like what it's supposed to taste like, I love those. And I review those as well.
And I agree. It's funny because a lot of people, and we're on a lot of the same the same Facebook groups, and the question comes up from and again, I hate this term, but people that some others would call a tater, and they always ask, what do you feel about Screwball, or how do you feel about Fireball, or this or that or the other? And like I said, if that's what's going to get them into it, if that's what they like, then what does it matter? If you don't like it, then just say like, oh yeah, it's not my thing. I think they all have their place. I think a good somebody, and I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was maybe one of our founding members on the Fox Valley Whiskey Society, and one of our biggest contributors is Leslie Spiller. So Leslie, thank you so much for being a part of the group, but contributing as much as you have. If anybody out there has the recipe, and it involves Screwball, and I don't remember what the other one is, maybe a Chambord or something like that, but it's a peanut butter and jelly cocktail. And I think it might be Chambord.
I would be all over that.
Yeah. They're great. They're absolutely wonderful in cocktails. So I don't like to drink them neat. I like Jack Honey and iced tea. I think that's a really good combination. Speakeasy, Wisconsin, have you ever originally been down on a distillery that you later won over?
So this is, thanks, Troy. Great question. And this is Troy's subtle way, which is why I wanted to answer this, of hitting the previous question that he asked, which is, what do I think of Wild Turkey? So I did not for a long time like Wild Turkey, anything Wild Turkey. And it's not because Jimmy and Eddie Russell aren't great people. They are some of the most wonderful people in whiskey today. But I wasn't big on Wild Turkey. It didn't hit my palate right. So last year, I had an opportunity to do a barrel pick of Wild Turkey that turned out to be one of 4 that I did last year for all Russell's Reserve. And right now I'm changed on it. I love it. There are obviously some barrels that I don't like, but you find that in any distillery. But I wound up going to one of the picks. I wound up going to Wild Turkey last October to do a pick for Bourbon and Banter. We've done what, three or four Russell Reserve picks for the Speakeasy. I really enjoy doing Wild Turkey picks right now.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I had, and I'll keep the questions brief from here on out, just for a time issue. And by the way, Jeff, I was thinking, as we were kind of doing this has been phenomenal interaction. You had said you had never done a live tasting before. I obviously do the Whiskey Wednesday, live casts like we're doing now. I also try to fit them in on Wednesday. So if you ever want to do another live tasting, I'm always here. We've had
Anytime.
great interaction. When it comes to whiskey tasting, practice makes perfect, and in the whiskey world, practice makes you better at talking about whiskey. With several options available for training your nose and your palate, like our friends over at Knows Your Bourbon on Instagram, and the training kits sold by the Stave and Thief Society or Moonshine University. What do you go to for training your senses to become a better reviewer?
So I'm going to make a lot of enemies with this statement. Go to a dollar store, grab every spice that they have, and they'll all cost less than $1, and make your own spice kit. Sniff it, taste it.
Listen to it, like my wife does. Like my wife told me to listen to it. What does it sound like?
If there's something that you really don't like, throw it out. You lost 75 cents. I mean, you don't have to buy top end. You don't have to buy top end spices, and you don't have to spend literally hundreds of dollars on a nosing kit. You can do it very cheap on your own between dollar stores and grocery stores, and just get spices, sniff them, taste them, and keep a flavor wheel out when you do that, so that you can go, okay, now you're looking at the words, you're tasting the flavor, you're smelling the aroma, and your mind will eventually weave that path to where you're recognizing what it is. But never give up the flavor wheel, because no matter how good you are, there's things where you're going to go, I need to see the word.
Yeah. The whiskey wheel is something that I think a lot of people kind of, I don't necessarily think maybe like avoid, but maybe just don't know about. Obviously the internet is a great, resource for things like this. Most of the events that we do with the Fox Valley Whiskey Society, we put a whiskey wheel up, on the screen, so that when they're tasting, they can say, oh yeah, leather, or, like Fred likes to say, marzipan or something like that. My wife is going to jump back in bed right now, so we're going to see this thing shake here for a minute. There she goes. The whiskey wheel is a great tool to use. The Fox Valley Whiskey Society.
While you're going.
Yeah, so the Fox Valley Whiskey Society actually has a file that I'll put it on tomorrow, that you can access on the Fox Valley Whiskey Society private group page, along with our whiskey bracket, which is similar to the March Madness, that we use for kind of grading whiskey. Very, very, very similar to the one that you can find on breakingbourbon.com. To their whiskey tasting sheet that you can print out. It's just a very simple PDF. I asked in the comments, Jeff, we're at an hour 38 since we started. This was a phenomenal conversation. We've had the highest viewer retention that we've had in all, I think we're going on 14 or 15 or whatever episodes now. Do you think we should do a live review weekly, or maybe even bi-weekly, or once a month with Jeff? Speakeasy, Wisconsin, yes. Silverlock Whiskey Society, that sounds good. Jamie, I'm gonna screw up that last name because there's too many PHs. Felf. Yes. Felfless. We've had some really, really great conversation. There was a couple of questions that I didn't get around to. We'll get to them next time. We'll definitely have to do this again. I love the idea of doing, maybe once every other week or month or whatever whatever you're interested in, and is logging on and doing a live whiskey review of maybe something that everybody should have on their shelves. Even Maker's Mark, or hell, even a Jack Daniel's. who doesn't have Jack Daniels on their shelf? I got a handle of it right next to me. Something that maybe everybody can do. Mark Augustin, I think, would be fun to do a blind flight with Jeff. I agree. I think that would be awesome. We're living in a COVID-19 world right now, and this is kind of hopefully won't stay the new norm. For me, obviously, it's great because this is what I do with the live cast. But I would love to much rather just get a group of us together and do this, in real life. So everybody, I'm gonna end there.
I think you ended earlier than you thought you were going to. Wait, he'll be back in a minute. We've been having
hold on, wait. You can hear me. Sorry.
Here.
So, can you hear me?
Back here. We can hear you now.
Sorry. I had my phone sitting right over the power button. I had my phone sitting right over the power button on the computer. And I turned the computer off. Tim Karkowski, my brother-in-law, my new brother-in-law. Eye-opening, learned a lot today. Thanks, Jeff, and Fox Valley Whiskey Society. Hope to hear more. Jeff, thank you for coming on. This was an absolute blast. I think we only lost each other maybe for a few seconds there in between. We'll forget about that time just a few seconds ago where I accidentally turned off my computer. I want to thank everybody who watched tonight. Jeff, we'll talk a little bit more, so don't log off just yet. Everybody who
I won't, but I do want to say thank you to everybody. I'm really glad that you can be here. I hope you learned something, and we will absolutely do this again.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again. We'll talk more about maybe doing kind of a more regular thing when it comes to whiskey tastings. I think that was a lot of fun for me. I don't know how it was for you, but I think we had a
I love this
great interaction. So thank you to Mark and Mary, Silverlock Whiskey Club, Speakeasy, our Patreon supporters, all of our subscribers. There's so many people to name. Wilson Torres with Union Horse Distilling. We will be talking to him on Monday, which I believe is the 15th. We will be talking with Alan Bishop next Wednesday with Spirits of French Lick in West Baden Springs, Indiana. We got a lot of great shows coming up. We're still working on more content. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Again, thank you for our subscribers, our Patreon supporters. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. Jeff, stay logged on. Everybody, we will see you guys. We will see you guys hopefully on Monday and Wednesday and every episode coming up here on out. Everybody, have a great night. Stay safe and cheers.
Cheers, everybody.